Welcome, week 1 of our introduction to journalism. Now, this week we'll be setting the sort of framework for what we will be covering, looking actually at a bit of theory and understanding to why we report the way we report and the principles that guide our investigation as journalists. So I will be referring to my notes, so if I be looking away, that is something to be aware about. The notes are in your, they should be in your Moodle site, and if you can't seem to find them, of course, feel free to drop us an email anytime. Now, we're going to be looking at some key areas of journalism. For those of you who've never heard of journalism or never thought of coming onto this unit, now we're going to be covering the basic principles that guide our investigative approach, why we do it, why journalists behave the way they behave, and what is its role in society, really. So let's take a look at journalism. Essentially is a vocation. If you already notice that it is less of an academic setting than more of a practical unit, where it requires you to do a lot of primary research. And what primary research would involve sometimes interviews, going out to the field and taking an understanding of what is going around within your community, your larger environment, and even world current affairs. So there needs to be a lot of writing skills for this unit, research, certain sorts of planning. So if you're doing a photo shoot, if you're planning an interview, all these skills are required for you to be a journalist. Understanding what a news angle is, and having a sense of what issues are important to your readers or viewers. So we just want to keep in mind these are some of the traits that a journalist should be having, and for you to kind of work through this course. The other thing about being a journalist is you've got to be able to speak to people, to strangers, which I know it's a different time and day these days, where technology has made it more maybe easier or more difficult for people to access strangers, but I suggest you get used to it, because we require a lot of information for you to gather from people you never met before. So we'll need to build a lot of courage. We'll need to learn to build our self-confidence, and just learn to ask the question. It doesn't matter what answer you get, as long as you begin by asking. So come to the course with a lot of curiosity. That really sets us up for being a journalism. Now, in this course, we are actually looking at the reasons why journalism exists. If you have done the reading or going to do the reading, it sets up a purpose of building a society where it's able to govern effectively or govern independently. So news is shared so that the public can have enough information to make decisions, whether at a family level, a community level, or a society level, and that in turn influences how a certain order of things can be done within a society. Truth seeking is the utmost tenet of journalism. Reporting it fairly, accurately, ethically, and of course with responsibility. So we know information is spread very easily these days. Fake news also spreads too easily these days. So as journalists, our number one rule is to always verify, and verify. So maintain that principle, that working approach when you are looking for your stories. Now, the value of journalism comes from providing facts. A simple example would be our current state of affairs, where we are all online and remote learning because of this pandemic. And we have been exposed to all sorts of different information, sometimes quite fear-mongering type of information, quite quite gossipy sort of information. So As journalists, our number one responsibility is to investigate the source of those information, to verify, to check, because spreading fake news and lies have very harsh or detrimental effects to not only just your community but also society as a whole. It can send mobs to supermarkets if there's fake news about curfew. It can can even be a start of racial riots if wrong accusations are being shared. So the impact is pretty serious. But what's also more important is it gives society the ability to check in with those who govern us. So journalism, or media rather, is seen as a fourth estate of society. And if you've done media studies, this is familiar to you. And they act quite, in theory, independently from the rest of society, because their role is to be a watchdog of those in power, government agencies, politicians, those in authority, so that there is no abuse and there is no misappropriation of public funds. So essentially, journalism exists as a public service. It keeps government honest, at least it tries to, as we've seen within Malaysia and in all parts of the world, from China. Well, China, there isn't much independent journalism. A great place in Southeast Asia for free press is Indonesia. The Philippines at a stretch, if Duterte isn't exercising his iron fist. Even Thailand, but now we have the junta in power, so that might be a bit tricky. But with the free press, there's conversations that will happen, questions of how authorities should treat or not treat you, how the poor should be protected, and how equality should be championed. So basically, it offers you a tool to manage society. It exposes injustices, hopefully rights them from wrong. It unveils hypocrisy, so that it comes back down to meeting the aim of public service, that it serves the public, particularly when those in power are using public funds. This journalism is utmost so important. So keep that in mind as a broader theoretical perspective. Now, they are often quite tired, journalists, because they are after the truth, and they spend many hours of the day looking and searching for various sources to verify information, to make sure that the public is informed correctly about certain policies, about how the society is run. So journalists are also citizens. They also have a certain biasness as humans, but as a journalist, their loyalty lies in to serving the public. So what primarily does, if you can look at some of the points, journalists report the news after gathering information that is correct. They help to monitor power, so they're watchdog over governments, making sure big business doesn't overcharge. Like AirAsia and Grab, not monopolizing the price structure and stiffing consumers. Uncover injustices. They tell stories, so they keep the communities alive and conversing and provide that connection within communities. So remember the last time you read an interesting story or watched a funny, interesting video. So it allows you to still have that humanity value by connecting conversations. So what is the truth? Of course, these days, with the varied amount of information, the truth means different things for different people. But ultimately, as a journalist, your role is to find out as much as possible down to its accurate source by asking simple questions. So we have a rule which you will learn even more across the units, and you will use in your reports by asking the 5 wives, 1 husband rule. So there's the 5 W questions: the who, what, why, when, and who, what, where, when, and why. And then you have the how. So by having all these questions covered when you're investigating a topic or a story, when you're interviewing people, it will help it will help you uncover what is the truth or the facts of the story that you're trying to investigate. So, no fabrication, no opinion. Your news stories for this unit is not your opinion. It's not commentary on what influencer is leading the pack in Instagram or what's the latest trend to come on into the gaming world. It's not your opinion. You have to back it up with data, statistics, and look at facts. Okay? So if you've gone through the reading, the further readings, I believe Lambert has covered this essential news elements by Murray Masterson. So news is defined by how much interest is there in a topic, how timely it is in that current climate. So clarity. We'll just come back to the COVID example. That's the best one people can relate to. How much interest it is. There's a very high interest in the developments of COVID and say its vaccines. How timely it is. Everyone is waiting for this vaccine and the news of what's effective. And clarity. It has to be clear and accurate. The information that you seek. Newsworthiness. Breaking it down. So you have those three elements that defines what makes news. Looking at what specific values that drive a news to make it to the website or front paging your major website or even a newspaper, if there are any newspapers left in your market. There are, but I think they're on a decline. Or even topping the first news broadcast in a news bulletin. So there are 6 as outlined by Murray Masterson. The first one is the impact. So think of the impact, the COVID impact on the community. We have seen what it has done to the world. Proximity, how close it is to your reader, how close it is to the city that you live in or you operate from. Conflict, negative news always makes the day. Nobody really reads about positive news. That's why news headlines tend to be about disasters, wars, death, and destruction. Human interest, back to that human connection. What interests you as a human being? It could be some act of kindness. It could be an act of tragedy. And that's what a lot of dramas are based on. A lot of real news events. Novelty, something that's unusual, that doesn't happen often. And prominence, how prominent it is within your community. So we'll just, if you skim through the notes, it will show you the different sort of elements of the significance of 9/11, if anyone remembers that, the Iraq War, the significance of the last US presidential election, that everybody was, hoping one particular candidate won over the other, the significance of a travel ban. We are not allowed to fly because of COVID, so how significant is that to your society? Proximity means across a few different things. Geographically, if you write a story about Singapore, does it matter to your Malaysian readers? Of course it does, it's very close. But if you write a story about Africa, is there a connection to Malaysia? Not necessarily so. So you base your newsworthiness on these factors. Culturally, what happens in Indonesia, will it affect what happens into Malaysia? I'm using the Malaysian context here. Historically and socially as well. So how close or how much impact these factors have towards your audience defines one of the aspects that shapes your newsworthiness of your topic. Conflict, I think we all know conflict hits the headlines pretty quickly. 2 warring tribes, 2 warring communities, 2 warring countries, even local news sometimes, a dispute between 2 neighbors that ends up in murder could be news. So those sort of elements drive your newsworthiness. Human interests, like I said, compassionate acts, charitable acts, young person helping the old, young person saving a puppy from drowning. Those sort of human interest stories will tug at your heartstrings and will give you a sense of I don't know, a sense of connection to the story, a sense of relatableness to the story, and then you're able to share that with your audience. Okay, novelty. Novelty, quite generically, tallest man in China is a novelty. What else could be a novelty? I don't know, largest person who climbs the highest mountain. Those sort of unusual sort of achievements or unusual sort of events that you have found out, and that will make your story newsworthy as well. Prominence tend to sit, it also can be defined by those who tend to be in the limelight, your celebrities, whether you like it or not. Some people are really into those sort of stories and they make the news, or your government officials, or the Queen, or some royals like, what's his name? What's William's brother? Meghan and Harry, deciding to abandon their royal duties and they moved to America. That made news. To me, it doesn't interest me, but some people are real royalists. They tend to watch those news. Those sort of stories will drive audiences to the site. So basically, news is a break from normal flow of events. News is also information people need to make decisions about their lives. Sometimes, coming back to those in power, some countries, governments actually own news organizations and require licensing. So news is what government or those in power dictate. So that is one of the main challenges of journalism as well. And always, no news is good news and all news is bad news. So those are some of the sort of snippets you can read from your slides. So basically, when you are out and about or online searching for ideas or discussing among your classmates, look for stories that people will want to read. Ask yourself, what would you want to read? And look for those sort of ideas to start investigating your stories. Maybe look for stories that people tend to not be able to get anywhere. If you end up working as a journalist in the future, that's what every newsroom aims to do. Find stories that they cannot get anywhere else. Okay, who decides what makes news? In this unit, I am performing the role of an editor. In the outside real world, if you do get to hit the newsroom, your editors will gatekeep. You will pitch a story to your editor, and he or she will help you kind of shape or define what news angle you can take. Sometimes, like I said, political forces, depending who your boss is. Economic considerations. So sites like Says.com, unfortunately BuzzFeed, BuzzFeed is not really a news site, but they tend to look for a lot of viral content that will really sensationalize the site and will draw a lot of traffic to it. So why do they do that? They need the numbers to keep the site running. So hence it's an economic consideration. And also social cultural factors. It really depends on where you're reporting. You could be in a very conservative Muslim society, so you could only report about certain thing, or you could be in a very liberal society where anything goes. So it all has that influence. So just remember that you are there to inform, educate, and also entertain. Just looking at the notes, you do have two types of reporting. For most of you, I think you will be doing it from a proactive point of view. It comes from an idea. Actually, no, I think maybe some of you would do reactive. I've had a lot of reactive stories in the last few years covering this unit. So a proactive story is something you have thought about that you think your audience would like to read. You go out and do the research, lots of investigation. Maybe the writing is really quite careful, in depth. Maybe the issue could be quite serious also. An example would be last year we had students who discontinued because they couldn't afford the fees anymore, or because of COVID, because of family consideration. So it was a human interest story, but also with an economic angle. A reactive story we had also last year was because of COVID, there was no school. A lot of bus drivers lost their jobs. They don't have students to ferry to school. So one of our Monash students went out to interview bus drivers, and that story came as a reaction from a bigger issue of the COVID lockdown. So it really depends on what angles you will be working on. Of course, we will be talking throughout the semester about this. Okay, so I will leave you here for now. You know where to reach me, and I hope you will come to Discord Zoom tutorial and chat on Discord with plenty of story ideas that we can start working on. Thank you.